Hi class, this is Steve. I'm really sorry about this week's video. I've actually had some technical problems and had to go out, and I thought I had my camera fixed, but now it wasn't, so I ended up having to get a new one. So here it is Sunday. I know you've had a forum that's due today. If you're a day late with it, that's fine, because as I read through the mid-semester surveys, I noticed the constant theme. Now remember, all your responses were anonymous, so I had no idea who said what. But the one common theme over and over again was that you liked the videos, in that it helped explain some of the material a little bit better. I think one person even wrote, they wish that I would go more point by point in the chapter. And I might try to do that, but for these next two topics, the two chapters that you're responsible for today, which is God's omniscience and omnipotence, and also God versus evil, this video would probably be about 2 hours long, and I don't think you really want to listen to me for 2 hours. By the way, the weather finally has broke here in Kentucky, and it's like 60 degrees outside. It's very nice. But by next week sometime or week after, we're expected to go back down into the 20s and 30s and snow again. I'm heading off to Orlando on Wednesday for work. It sounds funny. I don't like Florida, never have liked Florida. But flying out Wednesday and coming back Friday. But I'll have a computer with me, so if you need anything, I'll be checking email and all of that kind of stuff. Let's talk first a little bit about God's omniscience and his omnipotence. Omniscience is the fact that the statement is that God knows all things. One of your classmates wrote a really interesting point. I think it's in the Muddiest Point or the virtual classroom section. You might want to make sure you go out there and check those out, because some of those are really good. But one of your classmates wrote, if God already knows everything, then let's say he sees a murder happening down the road, maybe a week from now. Does that not make God an accomplice to that murder because he knows about it, but he doesn't intercede in it? And that's an excellent question. If God is omnipotent, which means he's all-powerful, and omniscient, which means he knows everything, why doesn't he simply intercede and prevent that murder from happening? Well, it really ties in with the next chapter, which is the chapter about God and evil. And it is God and evil is the one question that has haunted theologians and philosophers for all of these years. The bottom line is this with God and evil. With the idea of free choice comes the availability or the presence of evil. In other words, God could have made, God, Allah, whoever, whatever you believe, could have made us to be robotic and to love him regardless of how we might feel. If you look through, for example, my expertise is more in the Bible, the Old Testament, New Testament, although I do know a little bit about the Quran. The whole idea behind God creating mankind was to have fellowship and intimacy with mankind. But in order to have that fellowship and that intimacy, he had to give us free will. I mean, think about it. Would you really want somebody to be forced to love you? Think about a relationship you may be in or are in or have been in. How would you have felt if that person had a gun to their head, let's say, and say, oh, go love you? I mean, that's not love at all. That's being forced to do something. So in order for God to give us and to receive our love freely, then he had to give us free will. Well, therein comes the problem with evil and the problem with what your classmate posted on the discussion board. How come God doesn't intercede? God doesn't intercede with all things in a fallen world. Some things happen simply because we live in a bad world. For example, if as soon as I get done with this video recording, let's say I go pound down a 12-pack of beer, and I get in my car and I drive down the street, weaving in and out. Next thing I know, a little girl runs out in the street. I run over and kill her. Now, did God know? Did his foreknowledge, did his omniscience know this? Yes. Why didn't he intercede? His power, if he is omnipotent, why didn't he intercede and prevent that little girl from being killed? Well, because it's called free choice. I chose to do something stupid. I chose to drink a bunch of alcohol, get behind the wheel of a car, and have an accident. Let me tell you a story. I may have already told you this before. It's a story about a friend of mine who was a longtime missionary. And again, I hope if I've repeated this, I'm sorry. But he was a missionary in Bangladesh, and he had his family down there, his wife and 2 kids. The littlest one, Anna, the girl, was, I think, 11. And she and her mom were driving through the city where they were at, very busy, as you can imagine, bicycles everywhere, people everywhere. And next thing you know, Anna gets separated from her mother, rolls down an embankment on her bike, hits her head on a rock that's down there by the river, and dies instantly. When Todd got back to the States, he was devastated. As you can imagine what it would be like to lose a child. He and I went to seminary together many years ago, and he and I have a completely different perspective on the role of God and God's interference, or interference isn't the right word, God's involvement in mankind. Do I believe that God can intercede in time and space and history? Absolutely. It's been shown over and over again in the Bible. Some of you even shared experiences with that. I've had experiences like that. But why didn't he intercede in this case? Well, from Todd's theological and philosophical standpoint, he believed that God caused Anna's death. And he caused Anna's death for a greater and higher purpose. Well, I'm certainly not going to argue with a grieving father. He's a friend of mine, and he was in a great deal of pain, and I was not about ready to get into a theological debate with him. He was my friend, is my friend. But the way I looked at it was an accident. It was an accident because it's a fallen world. It is a world where evil exists. It is a world in which, from the very beginning, from the creation time, it was created perfect. And if you look up the word perfect, most of the definitions doesn't say flawless. I mean, it may down second, third, fourth definition. Usually it means whole, W-H-O-L-E, complete. So in order to have a whole and complete world, then God had to give us free choice. But with free choice, we will choose incorrectly. And that's what catapulted mankind into the world we live in today. Now, you can choose to believe that or not believe that. That's certainly your choice. This is not a class to force you to believe one way or the other. I'm just trying to explain to you a Jewish and a Christian perspective on this, that sometimes bad things happen in this world simply because they are bad things. Does God know about them? Yes. Should he intercede every single time? Well, some people would say yes. What about the 6 million Jews that were killed in World War II? What about the 620,000 Americans who were killed in the Civil War? How about just not long ago, well, last week I guess, the Ukraine. One night, 20 people were killed, thousands were hurt. I went to Romania in 1992 and saw the gunshots where people were being shot at by Ceausescu's government the night that the people took over. I mean, I still saw the gunshot holes inside. It was really weird because they have these Orthodox churches there, and there were bullet holes in the doors. It's pretty frightening. So, does God know all things? I believe he does. Is he all-powerful? Yes, I believe he is. But he chooses not to intercede at all times. Now, the big question is why? Why doesn't he just fix everything? And that is a question probably better left for the theologians. My personal belief is that God does not intercede in all things because he chooses not to. He simply says, this is a world in which these people are free to choose to live the lives that they want, and sometimes they make very poor choices. There's a scripture passage that says God works in all things for the good. But actually that preposition translated in the original language could also mean through. So God works through all things for the good. Now, a number of years ago, Rabbi Harold Kushner wrote a great selling book, a million-seller, best-selling book called Why Do Bad Things Happen to Good People? And he came down, this is a Jewish rabbi, mind you, he came down on the side that said, you know what? God is not all-powerful. That's why he can't prevent the Jews from being killed. That's why he couldn't prevent 620,000 Americans from dying in the Civil War. That's why he couldn't prevent what he would say now, the Ukraine from happening. He couldn't prevent Christian martyrs. He couldn't prevent terrorism because he was unable. Well, that sounds really good, except for one thing, and that is, if God is not able, why am I going to worship a God that is not all-powerful? I might as well worship the lamp that's sitting here by my desk. If it has not the power to do all things, then why would I worship him? Does he choose to always do all things? Absolutely not. Do I know why? No. To me, to have 6 million Jews killed in the Second World War, I can't see it. I don't see... I can't see it. You know, some people in church, they'll say real interesting things. I'm not sure if they really understand what they're saying. But this one kind of has a ring to it. If you've ever looked at a beautiful tapestry, let's say something that somebody had like a cross stitch or what do you call those? I guess it's just tapestry where like the yarn hangs out the back. Now if you look at the back of the tapestry, all you see is like these hanging threads, and it's really, really ugly and it doesn't make any sense. But when you turn it over and you see the beautiful picture that's painted, you see that all those terrible threads served a purpose. Now, can I ever, in my wildest dreams, imagine why 6 million Jews' death somehow perfects God's plan? I can honestly say I don't know how that would work. But the same way, I don't know how Anna's death, the little girl, I don't know how that plays into the picture. There is evil in this world, you know, God and evil, which is the latter chapter I had you read. Evil exists. I'm teaching a course at the church that I currently, my wife and I attend, and it's called Spiritual Warfare. And the first reality many people have to come to terms with, at least people who believe in the spiritual realm, is that there are such things as demons and, in fact, the devil. The Bible, in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew, the name is Ha-Satan, which means Satan. New Testament, it's Diabolos, which is, as you know, in Spanish it becomes Diabolos. It's a reference to Satan, that one that lives. So the question is, if God is so good, why does he allow evil to exist? And again, I still have to go back to the notion that with free choice comes bad things. So why did God give us free choice? Because without free choice, then there is no free love. It is a forced love, which is not what God wants. Somebody once said to me, this was really good, they said that for the Christian, for the believer, then the one thing they have to prove, or the one thing they have to explain, is why God and evil exists. But for the non-believer, they must explain everything else. So if you think about that for a minute, yes, we're struggling with the question of why does God allow evil to exist? But I guess the way I've looked at it, and it may be because of my particular bent of the way I think, that's not as important a question to me as the question of why do good things happen to bad people? If I believe the Bible, which I do, that says that all men have sinned, from the very beginning we are sinners, doesn't mean as a baby that the baby is a bad baby. It just means the baby has what's called Adamic sin, born with sin. We are all prone to sin and to do wrong things. So um, with that sin comes this idea that we're going to do bad things. Um, Evil exists because we have free choice. But what about all the good things that happen? What about the people who serve unselfishly? What motivates them? What happens to all the people who give everything they have to help others and they themselves have nothing? Why do good things happen to bad people? Sometimes I wonder why God looks at us and doesn't just say, away with all of you. You're nothing but a bunch of duds. But for every evil that you find, I have discovered in life, and I'm almost 52 years old, for every evil in life, I've found an act of love or graciousness somewhere else. Does that balance it? I don't know. I don't know if that's the balance of the world or not. When I was a senior in college back in 1984, I went to the University of Kentucky, and it was Christmas break between obviously between fall and spring semester, and I was getting ready to go back to the spring semester. I was a resident advisor in the dorms, so that meant that I could get back into the dorm like a day early to beat the crowd. So I left that night from the house, and my dad was not one of those people who was very emotional or anything like that. Never hugged me, never said he loved me, those kinds of things. But I knew he did. But that night we shook hands, and that was one of the first times he kind of treated me like a man, I guess. He shook my hand and all that. And I know you're going to think this is really weird, but I knew I would never see him again alive. I knew it. I got in my car. I had a '75 Chevy Vega, for those of you old enough to remember those, and I drove back to Lexington. The next day, I get a phone call. My dad had committed suicide. And so, of course, I had a friend drive me back to 2 hours back to my home. And the whole time I'm thinking, why did God let this happen? Why did God let this happen? And at that time, I wasn't really a believer. I did not believe in God, but I believed in God to a degree that he existed. So why would this good God let this happen? So after the funeral and after everything was settled, I talked to this minister about it. And this is what he told me. It's the worst advice I've ever heard. The worst thing anybody could say to me at that point. Well, God wanted your dad in heaven with him. Now think about that. I'm sitting there grieving as a 22-year-old saying, you've got to be kidding me. If this God wants to take away my dad because he wanted him, then that's a very selfish God, and I don't want any part of him. So for many years I stayed away. But then I began, as time went on, and I began to grow and began to read more, study more, talk more, learn more about the Christian faith. And my philosophy changed. I began to see a different picture, and the picture was this. My dad chose to do that on his own. He was clinically depressed. We didn't have hardly any money. We grew up very poor. And he was 57 years old when he did that and probably saw no future for himself. He was a sick man. And stigma of depression at that time was horrible. So instead of being treated for it, this is what happened. He tried to kill him. Well, he did kill himself. And anyway, so God and evil, God allows these kinds of things to occur because he gives us free choice. Now, I don't know if any of this helped at all, but that's the way I look at it. And as I read these 2 chapters, that's basically what I came up with. Hope this helped. Thanks a lot. Bye.